The wind cut through the alley like a knife, stirring bits of paper, tin, and dry leaves into lazy swirls. The town of Hollow Ridge sat beneath a sky smeared in ash and blood orange, as if God had forgotten to finish painting the day. Somewhere between the cracked boards of the saloon wall and the rusted ribs of a gutted wagon, a child's voice rose, soft and strange. "Mama always said cowboys are kind." Jackin Wade froze. His hand had been halfway to the flask in his coat, but the words hit him harder than the bottle ever could. He squinted into the alley, the brim of his dust-beaten hat casting a long shadow across his scarred face. He'd heard a lot in his years, begging, praying, dying, but that voice, small and confident in its sorrow, clawed at something he'd buried deep. He stepped into the alley's mouth, boots crunching over broken glass and the brittle carcass of a rat. There she was. A little girl, couldn't be more than 7, with straw-blonde hair matted in clumps, a calico dress that had lost its color to dirt and time, and eyes like green marbles staring into the belly of a trash barrel. Her skinny arms were elbow-deep in it, rifling through scraps with the practiced motion of someone who'd done this before. Jackin cleared his throat. The girl turned, eyes widening but not with fear. She looked up at him like she'd been expecting him all along. "You a cowboy?" she asked. He almost said no. The word felt like a lie coming out of his mouth, but something in her voice made it stick. "Was," he said. She tilted her head. "Mama said cowboys look like you. Dusty, tired, and carry guns." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Guess your mama was right." She turned back to the barrel, pulled out a crumpled biscuit with a frown, and dropped it. "Ain't much here today." Jackin watched her, something old and aching stirring in his gut. "Where's your mama now?" She shrugged, not looking at him. "Went into the saloon couple nights back. Told me to wait outside. I did. But she never came out." Silence fell like a hammer. Jackin's eyes slid toward the saloon door, just visible around the corner. It swung half open, creaking lazily in the breeze. He'd been in too many places like this, towns where women vanished and no one asked why. "What's your name, kid?" "Sadie." "You got anyone else?" She shook her head. "Mama said it was just us now. We came from over the mountains. Walked a lot." Mama had a cough. Jackin bit the inside of his cheek. This wasn't his fight. He'd made peace with being a ghost, riding from job to job, never staying long enough to get seen, never close enough to care. But this girl, there was something unshakable about the way she stood there, barefoot in filth, chin up, talking about her vanished mother like it was just another day. He looked away. The saloon's windows glared at him like judgment. "You hungry?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. "Not desperate, just honest." He grunted. "Come on then." Sadie followed him with small, careful steps. She didn't ask where they were going. Didn't cling or sniffle. Just walked a half step behind him, head high. Jackin led her to the diner, if it could be called that, a shack with a slanted sign that read dinner and whiskey in fading red paint. Inside, the air was thick with grease and tobacco. A few old men played cards in the corner. No one looked up. He sat her down in the booth farthest from the door and waved at the cook through the open counter. 2 plates. Something warm. Sadie looked around as if memorizing every inch. "You come here a lot?" "First time." "You talk like someone who don't like people." He raised an eyebrow. "You talk a lot for someone who just met me." She shrugged again as if that answered everything. The food came, beans, cornbread, and something pretending to be beef. Sadie ate slow, polite, but Jackin could tell she was starving. She glanced up only once and only to whisper, "Thank you." He didn't respond. Words like that always sat strange with him. When they finished, he paid and led her out into the evening. The wind had picked up, stinging with sand. Sadie blinked against it but didn't complain. "Where do you sleep?" he asked. She pointed to the alley. "Behind the crates. There's a blanket there. Smells bad, but the dogs leave it alone." Jackin exhaled through his nose. This town had that sour stink, not from the livestock or the latrines but from something deeper. The kind of rot that lived in people's silence. "You can't stay there." She tilted her head again. "Where else I got?" He didn't have a good answer. He should have kept walking when he first heard her voice. Should have let the wind take it like all the other ghosts. But something inside him, that sliver of decency he thought he'd buried with his past, had woken up. And now it wouldn't shut up. "There's a barn out past the mill," he muttered. "Dry. Ace clean. I'll walk you there." She looked up at him, not smiling, not beaming, just nodding like it was the most natural thing. "All right." They passed through the outskirts of Hollow Ridge as the sky bruised darker. Shadows stretched long and hungry across the plain. Jackan's horse, Dust, stood tied outside the livery, chewing hay like it didn't care the world was crumbling. Sadie stopped beside the horse and stared up at it. "He's pretty?" Jackan smirked. "He smells worse than that blanket of yours." She giggled. It was small and sudden, and it twisted something sharp inside him. They reached the barn just as the last light died. Inside, the scent of hay and leather greeted them. Jackan made a bed of straw in the corner. Sadie curled into it without complaint. "Where will you be?" she asked softly. He nodded to the stall next to hers. "Close." She lay still for a moment, then whispered, "You ever had a daughter?" His jaw tensed. "Once." "She gone?" "Yeah." "How?" Jackan sat down hard on an upturned bucket, staring at the floorboards. "Bad men." She was quiet for a long time. "You kill him?" He didn't answer. That night, Jackan didn't sleep. He sat in the straw, revolver across his lap, listening to the wind push against the barn walls. Sadie breathed evenly. She hadn't cried once. Come morning, light spilled through the slats in soft gold lines. Sadie stirred, blinking awake. "You still here?" she said like it was the strangest thing in the world. "Yeah," Jackan said. "You gonna leave?" He thought about it. About Dust, about the road, about the way he trained himself never to look back. But Sadie was sitting up now, brushing straw from her hair, looking at him like he was part of something again. Not yet. And in that moment, Jackan Wade, former outlaw, self-made ghost, and man who hadn't cared about anything in years, made a silent promise. Not the kind you speak out loud. The kind that lives in blood and shadow. The kind you keep. There was still dust on his boots and whiskey in his veins. But something new stirred in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something close. A flicker. A beginning. Outside, the town was waking up, but inside the barn, something had already changed. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a man and a girl, still breathing, still here. And for now that was enough. The morning broke slow, with sunbeams filtering through the barn's slats like hesitant fingers. Jackan sat cross-legged in the hay, rubbing sleep from his eyes, though he hadn't truly slept. His revolver lay within reach as it always did. Across from him, Sadie stirred, her small hands brushing hay from her dress. She blinked up at him with those green eyes, steady, alert. "You didn't leave," she said again as if she still didn't believe it. Jackan grunted. "Told you I'd be close." She nodded like it mattered, like promises still meant something in her world. They left the barn with the rising sun on their backs. Dust snorted at their approach, shifting on hooves worn by years of riding. Jackan lifted Sadie into the saddle first, her small hands gripping the worn leather horn with quiet excitement. Then he swung up behind her, settling into the rhythm of the road before they even left town. They rode slow through the desert, skirting the edge of a dry creek bed, the horizon blurring in heat and silence. Sadie didn't speak for a while, and Jackan appreciated it. Too many words weighed the air down, and he liked it better when thoughts stayed in their own corners. But eventually her voice came soft and curious. "You think Mama's gone for good?" He didn't lie. "Yeah." Sadie nodded, chewing on her lower lip like she'd expected that. She was real pretty. Could sing real sweet when she wasn't coughing. Jackan watched the road ahead, but his jaw tightened. "I'm sorry." She said, "When people leave, they don't go far. Just into the sky. Like the stars." "That what you believe?" Sadie paused. "I believe," she tried. That stuck with him. Not hope. Just the truth, plain and sharp. They camped by nightfall, making a small fire shielded by a rock outcropping. Jackan laid out a blanket for her and shared the last of the salted pork from his saddlebag. He drank water and stared at the flames, trying not to feel the weight of the quiet. Sadie lay down but didn't close her eyes. "You still ain't told me your name." He hesitated. "Names came with history." "Jackan," he said at last. She rolled the name around her tongue like she was testing its strength. "That short for anything?" "Just Jackan. Sounds like a cowboy name." He smirked, then let the silence return. But her next words came low and met. "Why'd you stop being one?" He didn't answer for a long while. The fire cracked. Dust shifted in his sleep nearby. Finally, Jackan said, "Because I forgot how." Sadie didn't ask more. She pulled the blanket to her chin, and soon her breathing slowed, even and calm. When dawn came, they rode again, now heading toward Dustwell, a town Jackan only remembered because he once buried a knife in a man's leg there. It was one of those places that pretended to be civilized, all painted facades and straight roads, but it was full of broken things and bitter men. Still, it had a church, a store, and maybe someone who could help a girl like Sadie find shelter. They arrived late in the afternoon. The sun was dull behind clouds and the whole town seemed hushed. Jackin dismounted and lifted Sadie down gently. She adjusted the oversized coat he draped over her shoulders. The cuffs still dragged past her hands. "Where are we?" "Dustwell," he muttered. "Don't smile at anyone." "Why not?" "Because they'll think you owe them something." She didn't smile after that. They tied Dust outside the general store and Jackin took her inside. The air smelled of leather, kerosene, and the lingering sourness of last week's whiskey. Behind the counter stood a woman with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes. "We need clothes for the girl," Jackin said. "Boots too. Real ones." The woman glanced down at Sadie, then back at Jackin. "Don't look like you got a daughter." "I don't." That earned a longer stare, but she didn't argue. She pointed toward the back, and soon Sadie was trying on dresses in a curtained stall. Jackin leaned against the doorframe, watching the street. "You're not from around here," the woman said. "Don't plan to be." She handed him a clean pair of socks. "You planning to protect that child?" Jackin's eyes narrowed. "What's it to you?" She met his gaze evenly. "She's better off with someone who sees her as more than a burden." Jackin didn't respond. Not because he couldn't, but because the words burned too close to truth. When Sadie came out, she wore a soft blue dress that fit well enough, though the hem dragged a little. The boots were a touch big, but she didn't complain. Jackin paid, folding bills with rough fingers. As they stepped outside, a voice called out behind them. "Well, hell. Didn't think I'd see you back here, Wade." Jackin turned slow. A man leaned against a post by the sheriff's office, chewing a splinter of wood. He wore a tin star pinned to his vest and a crooked grin that hadn't aged well. Sheriff Ames. Once a rustler, then a bounty hunter, now wearing the law like a borrowed coat. "Don't believe I gave you my name," Jackin said flatly. "I don't forget snakes," Ames replied. "Especially ones that slither off in the night without a cut." Sadie shrank back behind Jackin's leg. He put a hand on her shoulder. "Not here to settle anything," Jackin said. "Just passing through." "Thought you gave up riding," Ames said, eyeing the girl. "You running charity now?" Jackin's fingers itched for his gun, but he kept them still. "She's not yours to ask about." Ames smiled wider. "Everything in Dustwell's mine to ask about. You want trouble, I can give it to you." "Don't want trouble," Jackin said quietly. "But I won't run from it either." They locked eyes for a breath too long. Then Ames spat into the dirt and walked back into his office. Jackin led Sadie down the street, feeling eyes on his back. She looked up at him. "You knew him before?" Jackin nodded. "Bad men wear good hats sometimes." They found the boarding house at the edge of town. The woman who ran it didn't ask questions when Jackin paid up front. He got a small room, 2 beds. No windows. Safe enough for now. That night, as the lamp flickered on the wall, Sadie sat on the edge of her bed, boots lined up neatly beneath her. "Why'd that man hate you?" she asked. "Because I quit something he didn't." She blinked slowly. "He's not nice." "No. He's not. I don't want to stay here long." "Neither do I." Jackin lay awake long after Sadie fell asleep. His mind kept wandering to Ames, to the glint in his eye, the way his fingers hovered near his holster. Old instincts clawed at his gut. He'd burned bridges with worse men, but Ames was the kind who held grudges like sacred oaths. The night dragged heavy and still. Come morning, Jackin rose early, stepping out into the cold air. The town was waking. A rider passed by with saddlebags full of letters and a rifle across his lap. A dog barked at a tumbleweed, the ordinary stuff of dying towns. He bought bread and jerky from the store and returned to the room. Sadie sat on the bed, eyes distant. "I had a dream," she said. "Bad." She shook her head. "Mama was walking. Said she found her place. But she couldn't stop." Jackin said nothing. Sadie looked at the small window near the ceiling. "You think she's watching?" "Maybe. I hope she's not sad." "She wouldn't be." Sadie stood, walked over, and handed him the boots he'd left by the bed. "We should go." He looked down at her. "Go where?" "Where people don't know you. Where they don't look at me like I'm something broke." Jackin knelt, placing the boots on the floor between them. "Soon," he said. But his gut told him soon might not come. Ames had seen her. And Ames didn't forget. Trouble had a way of circling back when you tried to outrun it. Still, Jackin Wade wasn't the running kind. Not anymore. The wind had a strange bite that morning, as if it carried whispers from the past through the brittle streets of Dustwell. Jackin stood on the porch of the boarding house, arms folded across his chest, eyes scanning the dusty thoroughfare like a man watching a fuse burn slow. Sadie sat on the step beside him, her boots scuffed, dress patched at the elbows, chewing on a crust of bread like it was something sacred. She hadn't said much since the run-in with Ames, and Jackin hadn't pushed. Silence, he'd learned, could hold more weight than words when the wrong ones hung too heavy. "Town feels wrong," Sadie said quietly. Jackin looked down at her. "What makes you say that?" "Feels like people here look but don't see." He nodded, not surprised. Dustwell had always felt that way, even years back when he first rolled through. Too clean on the outside, too rotten underneath. He could smell it again now, the stink of something festering beneath the surface. And it had a name, Ames. They spent the morning gathering supplies, enough for a few days' ride. Jackin didn't trust the boarding house to keep them safe longer than that. A man like Ames didn't let grudges cool, especially when they walked back into his town wearing a badge-sized reminder of old wounds. At the general store, Jackin asked about wagons for hire. The clerk, a nervous young man with a twitchy eye, barely looked up. "Don't have none free," he said. "Unless you want to ask the sheriff. He's got access." Jackin gave a humorless laugh. "I'd rather walk to hell barefoot." The clerk flinched. "Suit yourself." Outside, Jackin adjusted the saddlebags on Dust while Sadie petted the horse's muzzle. He didn't notice the man watching from across the street until he caught the glint of steel, reflected sunlight off the barrel of a pistol. Ray Mendez. He stood beside the undertaker's office, leaning against the wall like he belonged there. Tall, rangy, with a face like weathered stone and a single silver hoop in his left ear. Jackin recognized him instantly. Mendez had run with bounty hunters from out Elkhorn Way. Paid well, shot faster than he talked, and never cared if the target was breathing when delivered. Their eyes met. Mendez smiled, slow and thin, and tapped the brim of his hat. Then he walked off without a word. Jackin's mouth dried. "Time to move," he said almost to himself. But when they returned to the boarding house, something was wrong. The door hung open. The landlady was gone. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. Jackin drew his revolver as he stepped through the doorway. The room was empty. The bed unmade. Sadie's dress lay on the floor, crumpled like she'd been pulled from it. "Sadie?" he called low and tight. No answer. A noise came from the hallway, a boot scraping wood. Jackin turned, gun raised. The landlady appeared, eyes wide, hands shaking as she pointed toward the back. "Three of them," she whispered. "Came in quiet. Took the girl." Jackin moved without speaking. Down the stairs, out into the street, saddlebag over his shoulder, rage pounding in his chest like a war drum. Mendez. Had to be. Sadie wasn't leverage, she was bait. He found the trail quick. Footprints in the alley. Horse tracks leading west. Toward the old freight station. Dustwell had stopped running trains a decade ago, but the station still stood, half buried in sand and haunted by rust. Jackin rode hard. Dust kicked up behind him in thick clouds, sun burning overhead like a judgment. He didn't think about what he'd say if he caught them. He didn't think about consequences. He thought about Sadie's voice that first day in the alley. Mama always said cowboys are kind. He thought about promises made in silence and blood. The freight station loomed ahead, crooked and collapsed in places but still standing. He dismounted 50 yards out, tying Dust to a mesquite tree and approaching on foot. Gun drawn, breath slow. He counted 3 horses hitched outside. Voices inside muffled by walls. Jackin stepped through a broken window and into shadow. The room was dim, the air stale with the stink of old oil and sweat. Sadie sat on the ground, hands tied, lip bleeding. One man stood over her, back turned, broad shoulders, long black coat. Not Mendez. A hired hand. The second man leaned against a support beam, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. The third, Mendez, stood by the door watching the horizon through a slat in the wall. Jackin moved fast. 2 steps forward. 1 shot. The knife man dropped, his blade clattering to the ground before his body hit. The big man spun, drawing his pistol, but Jackin fired again, clipping his shoulder and sending him crashing into the wall. Mendez didn't flinch. "You always were quicker than you looked," he said, voice dry. Jackin didn't lower the gun. "Let her go." Mendez smiled faintly. "She ain't worth what you're about to lose." "Neither are you." Sadie's eyes were wide, terrified but unbroken. Jackin nodded once. She ducked her head, rolled behind a crate. Mendez moved. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Jackin dove left, rolled behind a rusted filing cabinet as bullets punched into the wall. Dust rained down. Jackin fired back twice, heard Mendez grunt. The bastard was quick but not careful. The big man groaned from the corner, trying to crawl away. Jackan stepped out of cover and fired once more. Silence fell. Mendez slumped against the doorframe, blood soaking his coat. His revolver slipped from limp fingers. Jackan stood in the middle of the wreckage, chest heaving. The smell of gunpowder filled the room. Sadie crawled out from behind the crate, still tied at the wrists. He rushed to her, cutting the cords with his blade. "You all right?" She nodded, lip trembling but holding firm. "You came. Always was going to." He lifted her into his arms and carried her outside. The wind had changed, cooler now, less biting. Dust nickered softly as they approached. Jackan set her down, helped her into the saddle. Then he mounted behind her, arms wrapped protectively. "You kill them?" she asked, voice flat. "Yes." "Good." They rode back toward town in silence. Halfway there, Sadie spoke again. "Why'd they take me?" "Because they thought I'd care." "You do." He didn't answer, but she felt the way he held the reins, tight, guarded, angry. Back in Dustwell, eyes followed them. No one asked questions. The landlady gave them a room again, but Jackan didn't plan on staying. He cleaned the blood from his hands, checked his bullets, and watched Sadie sleep that night. The girl was changing. Not hardened, not yet, but shaped. The world had shown her its teeth, and still she hadn't broken. Neither would he. In the morning they'd leave. Ames was still in town, and now Jackan knew the stakes. The girl was more than a promise now. She was purpose. The morning sky stretched pale and empty over Dustwell, the sun not yet burning off the cold that clung to the streets. Jackan stood outside the boarding house, his coat flapping gently in the breeze, eyes fixed on the sheriff's office across the square. The events at the freight station had cracked something open inside him. Something old, bitter, and unfinished. He'd killed men before. He'd even killed men who deserved it. But this wasn't about killing. Not anymore. This was about finishing what he'd walked away from all those years ago. Sadie came to stand beside him, pulling her coat tight at the collar. She didn't say anything, just looked up at the sheriff's door like she understood something was coming. Maybe she did. She'd grown quiet in the past day, not from fear but from knowing. Her silence had the weight of someone who'd seen too much too young and learned quickly that words didn't fix anything. Jackan crouched in front of her and adjusted the scarf around her neck. "Things might get loud," he said. She nodded. "You're not gonna run." "No. I'll wait. But don't make me wait long." Her voice held firm, and Jackan's stomach twisted with the kind of pride that came with dread. He straightened, rested a hand on her shoulder, and turned toward the saloon. If there was one thing he knew about a man like Ames, it was that he'd never hide behind a desk. He'd be where the whiskey flowed, where the guns hung loose on hips and everyone talked too much about things they didn't understand. The saloon's batwing doors creaked as Jackan pushed through. The smell hit him first. Old liquor, sweat, and smoke. A handful of men sat at tables, nursing hangovers or pretending they hadn't noticed the tension that had wrapped itself around Dustwell like a noose. Behind the bar stood Ames, cleaning a glass with the kind of lazy rhythm that said he'd been expecting Jackan. "Took you long enough," the sheriff said, setting the glass down. Jackan stepped forward, boots thudding slow across the wooden floor. "You sent Mendez." "I did." "He's dead." "I figured." Ames didn't reach for his gun. Not yet. He just leaned against the counter, that crooked smile fixed in place. "You came back to finish something, Jackan?" "I came back because you dragged a child into it." Ames laughed, sharp and dry. "That girl's got nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with it now. You think you can walk into my town, play the hero, and not pay for what you were? You forget I know who you were before you grew a conscience." Jackan's hand hovered near his holster. "I didn't forget. That's why I'm here." A chair scraped behind him. Jackan didn't turn. He didn't need to. He could hear the shift of weight, the intake of breath, the subtle tension in the room snapping taut. "You gonna shoot me in the back like you did Cole?" Ames asked. Jackan's eyes narrowed. "Cole put a bullet in a child. I ended it before he could finish the job. You always did get sentimental about the little ones. That was it." Jackan moved like lightning. His revolver cleared leather, and the shot cracked through the saloon like a thunderclap. The man behind him dropped before he could draw. Another fired from the corner, missed, and caught a return shot in the thigh. Screaming echoed. Glass shattered behind the bar. Ames had moved too, quick, drawing his own pistol, ducking behind the bar as Jackan rolled across the floor, kicking over a table for cover. "Town needs men like me," Ames shouted from behind the bar. "Keeps the wolves from the doors." "You are the wolf," Jackan growled. More shots rang out. Jackan fired low, caught a glimpse of Ames's leg and shot again. A curse exploded from behind the bar. The saloon emptied. The townsfolk scrambled out into the street, shouting. Some cheered. Others just watched. Dustwell wasn't loyal, it just liked a good story. Then came a pause. Quiet fell. Jackan stood slowly, stepping around the bar, gun aimed down. Ames was on the floor, bleeding from his thigh. He tried to raise his pistol again, but Jackan kicked it aside. Go ahead, Ames hissed. You want to be a savior? Finish it. Put me down like a dog. Jackan stared at him, chest heaving. You already put yourself down. Ames spat blood. You think this makes you better? No, Jackan said. Just cleaner. He turned and walked away. Outside, Sadie stood on the edge of the boardwalk. Her face was pale, but her chin didn't waver. She looked at him like she already knew the answer. It's done? She asked. Jackan nodded. Is he dead? No. She seemed to think about that, then looked up at the sky. Mama wouldn't have wanted more killing. He sat down on the bench beside her, the tension seeping out of his limbs like poison leaving the blood. I think you're right, he said. You gonna get in trouble? Probably. Sadie was quiet for a while, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small. A smooth, rounded stone, dark red and warm in color. She handed it to him without a word. Mama gave it to me, she said. Said it'd keep me safe. I think you need it now. Jackan took it gently. That's so. She nodded. You ain't done yet. He rolled the stone in his hand. It had no weight to it, but it felt like something ancient. I don't know where to take you next, he admitted. She shrugged. Doesn't matter where. Just matters you go with me. That simple. That clear. Jackan looked out at the street. The people of Dustwell had returned to their doors, watching him not with suspicion anymore, but with something else. Caution. Curiosity. Maybe respect. But he didn't care about that. What mattered was that Sadie was still here. Still standing. Still willing to believe that a man like him, cut from rust and regret, could be something better. As the sky deepened and the desert winds rose again, Jackan made a quiet decision. The kind that didn't need words, only action. There would be no more running. No more half-living. He would find a place for her, yes, but he would also face whatever shadows waited on the next trail. And when he stood again, it was with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. They walked together through the edge of town, the stone tucked into his pocket, her hand gripping his sleeve, not out of fear but out of trust. Behind them, Dustwell creaked and whispered, a town that would remember the day something old died and something older was reborn. The sun hung low over the desert, a molten coin slipping into the jagged teeth of the hills. Jackan Wade rode silent, every muscle taut beneath his coat, every breath careful. Sadie sat in front of him on Dust's saddle, her small frame bundled in a patched wool blanket. She leaned against his chest, eyes half closed but awake. She always was, even when quiet. Always watching. They hadn't spoken since leaving Dustwell behind, leaving Sheriff Ames bleeding on the floor and the weight of years heavier on Jackan's shoulders than any saddle ever had been. The silence wasn't cold, it was understood. They were past needing to explain. They rode until twilight deepened into something close to night. The desert cooled quick, and stars bled through the sky like fresh-shot holes in a canvas. Jackan guided Dust off the trail and toward a stone rise with a small overhang, a place out of sight, good for fire and sleep. He dismounted, lifted Sadie down gently. She stretched her arms but didn't speak. Her eyes followed him as he built a fire and unrolled a blanket. She didn't need reassurance. She just needed him to keep doing what he'd been doing, showing up. As the fire cracked and spit orange light into the dark, Sadie sat cross-legged, staring into the flames. Jackan watched her from across the fire. Her dress was fraying again at the seams, boots dusted and worn. But her eyes held the same defiant steadiness they had in that alley behind Hollow Ridge's saloon. She had grown tougher but not colder. He took comfort in that. There was still light in her. It hadn't been stolen. You still thinking we're gonna find a safe place? She asked, not looking at him. I'm thinking we're not stopping, till we do. What if we don't? He tossed a twig into the fire, listened to it hiss and curl. Then we keep going. Sadie nodded. All right. Jackan leaned back against his saddle, exhaling slow. The aches in his body reminded him he wasn't young anymore. His side still pulled tight from the last scrape with Mendez's men. He hadn't let Sadie see how deep it had gotten. Didn't need her carrying worry on top of everything else. But the truth was, he was tired. Worn down to his bones. As he adjusted the bandage under his shirt, Sadie looked up suddenly, her voice cutting the air like a flint strike. You ain't gonna die, are you? Jackan met her eyes. Not tonight. You promise? He hesitated, then said, I've broken a lot of promises in my life. I ain't gonna break this one. She studied him for a moment longer, then lay down and pulled the blanket up to her chin. You're better than they said. He didn't ask who they were. Ghosts talk too much anyway. She slept. Jackan stayed up, watching the dark, every creak in the wind setting his hand closer to his pistol. Trouble, he knew, didn't care about distance or time. Trouble followed you until it finished what it started. And sure enough, just before dawn it found them. The first shot came from the ridge, distant, deliberate. It cracked the silence like the sky itself had split. Dust reared and screamed. Jackan rolled instantly, drawing his revolver, covering Sadie with his body as another shot sent a burst of sand into the fire pit. Stay down, he growled, voice cold steel. Sadie obeyed, pressing herself flat to the ground as Jackan crawled behind the saddle for cover. A voice called out from the darkness. Familiar. You didn't think Ames was the only one left, did you, Wade? Jackan's blood chilled. Jericho Slate. One of the last from the old crew. The meanest of them. He'd disappeared after the mine job in Bitter Hills. Jackan had hoped he was dead. But hope, like kindness, was a luxury he'd long stopped affording. I'm only here for the girl, Jericho called. She's got a price on her now. Not a big one, but enough to make it worth the ride. Jackan peeked over the rise, spotted a glint of silver in the rocks above. Rifle scope. The second man, possibly more. She ain't yours, Jackan shouted back. She ain't yours either, Jericho answered. But she's a ticket out of this dust hole for me. And I never liked you enough to care if you got in the way. Jackan took a breath, calculated distances. 2 men, maybe 3. One with a rifle, one closer. Jericho always liked to get personal. If Jackan didn't act fast, Sadie would die. Or worse. He turned to her. You remember how I taught you to run low? She nodded, eyes wide, fear bubbling behind them. See those rocks east, behind the cactus line? When I fire, you go there. You don't stop. She grabbed his hand, small and trembling. Don't let them take me. They won't. He stood, fired twice, quick, loud, deliberate. The rifleman ducked. Jackan grabbed Sadie and shoved her low, sending her sprinting into the rising dawn. Her dress whipped behind her like a banner. Bullets followed. Jackan ran the opposite direction, drawing fire, looping through brush and broken earth. Pain flared in his side. The old wound had torn. But he kept moving, kept firing, kept drawing them away. Jericho shouted something and a figure broke from the ridge, charging down. Jackan ducked behind a rock and waited. The man appeared, gun raised, too slow. Jackan shot him through the chest. Another came. Jackan rolled, shot once, missed. The man fired back. The bullet grazed Jackan's arm. He grunted, fired again. This time the man dropped. Only Jericho left. A long pause. Then slow clapping. You got better, Jericho said, stepping into view. Long coat, big revolver, eyes black and amused. Jackan stood, bleeding, breathing like a furnace. Should have stayed in the hole you crawled into, he muttered. Jericho shrugged. I came to clean up. They circled. 2 wolves, old and worn but still dangerous. Jackan's gun was low. Jericho's was high. Then silence. Then steel. They both fired. The shots rang together. Jericho staggered back, blood blooming at his chest like a crimson flower. Jackan dropped to one knee, hand pressed to his side. Jericho laughed, a bubbling, awful sound, and fell. He didn't move again. Jackan stayed down for a moment, tasting iron in his mouth, head swimming. The sun crested the hills. He stood with effort, pain carving deep into his ribs. But he stayed upright. He had to. Sadie, he called hoarse. A few seconds passed. Then she appeared, crouched behind a rock, eyes wide. She ran to him, threw her arms around his waist. He winced but didn't push her away. You're hurt, she said. Just scratched, he lied. She looked down at Jericho's body. Was he like the others? Worse. She didn't look away. But he's gone now? Yeah. She reached into her coat and pulled the red stone out again, placing it in his hand. I told you it'd keep you safe. He smiled faintly, fingers closing around it. You might be magic. She smiled back, exhausted and brave. They buried the bodies beneath the rocks, said nothing over them. The desert didn't need prayers. It had silence for that. Later, as they rode again, Jackan looked down at her. You still want to find a place? She nodded. A real one. Then let's ride. And they did. Toward a new morning. Toward the unknown. But together. Always that.